We're here in the Ping Putting Lab, located inside the Ping Proving Grounds at Ping HQ in Phoenix, Arizona. It's here our master fitters work with top players from around the world, professional and amateurs, to dial in and custom build their putters so they can compete at the highest levels. It's also where Ping researchers study the art and science of putting, conducting experiments and testing their latest theories using the most advanced tools available. We asked Dr. Eric Hendrickson, Ping's Director of Golf Science, to give us a deep dive into what Ping is doing to make putting easier. There's a lot more to it than you might think.
We do a lot of what we call golf science research, so trying to gain fundamental understandings of how things work. And our designers are now trying to leverage that insight and apply that to designs. So they take maybe all these different variables and these different insights we get in the golf science world from the fundamental research and try to combine them into optimal combinations for different players. So we have meetings multiple times a week with our design engineers discussing the fundamentals of the physics of putting, the elements of human psychology that come into that, and feed those insights to the design team so they can create embodiments that leverage that understanding and ultimately go into the designs that you see in the market. I'm sitting on a 70-ton piece of granite right now. And so I wasn't here when it was installed, but apparently it was quite the feat getting this in here and set up. It's flat to 10,000ths of an inch from end to end. It's about 45 feet long. On top of that granite, we have a TrueLine putting surface that helps us get good rolling characteristics and something that represents a real putting green. And so that allows us to have a very precise roll and reaction when we execute a putt. And then we can then couple that with testing we do on the outside putting green at the proving grounds and marry those two behaviors to ultimately arrive at putting designs that help people putt their best. So we have a number of cameras that we use to analyze what the player does, what happens at impact, and then what the ball does after impact. So we have cameras that line the table and can track the ball down the length of the table, which helps us understand how what happens at impact influences what the ball's doing. They have different frame rates, so we can operate and isolate the 500 microseconds of impact and actually look at various frames over that impact interval at really high speeds. So those cameras play a big role in fitting, so we can kind of understand how different players are adjusting to the putters that we're putting in their hands, but then they're key for research. So when we're trying to dive into one little small variable that we change, we need to use those cameras to understand and measure what happened when we change those variables with the putter design. We have the putting robot to take the player out of the equation when we're zeroing in on just the equipment and impact. We're able to execute putting strokes, different types of putting strokes, so we can make adjustments to that putting robot to have maybe a certain amount of face rotation or a certain length of putt. And it's really useful in trying to take the player out of things, and people are messy. And so when doing some of this testing, it's really helpful to take them out of the equation and understand how certain mass properties and maybe face treatments influence performance. And so the putting robot is really useful for that type of research. With player testing, a lot of times we're trying to kind of look at how putter design is influencing what the player does. At one level, a player's putting stroke is kind of like their signature. It doesn't change a whole lot at a macro level, but there's certain design elements that can change it, make micro changes to what they do, and ultimately influence performance. So a lot of times during player testing, we're trying to kind of understand how those different design elements might be influencing what the player does, and then ultimately proving out performance, right? Nobody's a robot. And so ultimately, if we're trying to verify or validate that a certain design is helping somebody putt better, we need to have players do it and measure what happens when we put that design in a player's hands. We learn a lot working with the best putters in the world as to what are the different elements and how are they influencing the performance of the best players in the world. And then we can then take that information and then apply it to everybody. They serve as a great baseline for us to make conclusions, conduct research, and gain some insights into how putter design can influence performance. One of the more fun projects and technologies that we've used is eye tracking. So that's where we actually put a device, kind of like glasses, and we can actually see where a player's focused, both prior to making a putting stroke and then during the putting stroke. And so it gives us insight into how different alignment aids might influence where a player looks and what they're focused on. We've seen players go from one alignment aid to another and seen their gaze pattern tighten up. So they're able to focus more on the ball or their point of focus based on the alignment aid, whereas the other alignment aid, it might be very scattered, and a player, has a difficulty, focusing on either the putter or the ball or even a spot in front of the ball. And then it's actually been applied in other areas of sport as well. So players shooting free throws, understanding what they focus on while shooting a free throw. And so seeing all that, it was like, wow, there's a great application to putting, and trying to understand for us how the shape and the alignment aids and the overall look of a putter can influence how a player can perform in terms of what they're focusing on when they're making a putt. I think Karsten would be extremely jealous of the technology that we have right now and the measurements that we're able to take. He was brilliant in his conceptual understanding of how things worked, and he was always trying to leverage that understanding. And now with the technology we have, we've validated a lot of his philosophies with objective measurements that he was never able to in his day. And so it's a lot of fun with all the history that we have, connecting the dots with, years and years and years and generations of research with new technology and having those moments.